The day he turned 18, they handed him a bag and closed the door. No one said goodbye. No one asked where he would go. The woman at the front desk didn't look up from her paperwork. The other kids kept eating breakfast in the hall behind him, spoons scraping bowls, as if nothing had changed. He stood there for a moment, waiting. For what? He didn't know. Maybe for someone to call his name. But no one ever called his name here. They called him by his room number. Room 7, for 18 years. That was all he had been. The door stayed shut. He shifted the bag on his shoulder. Everything he owned fit inside and started walking. No direction, no destination, just away. The autumn wind cut through his jacket. He didn't look back. There was nothing to look back to. If this opening found you today, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Sometimes it helps to know we're not alone in the quiet places. Drop a comment below. Your presence here matters. 3 days, maybe 4. He stopped counting when his legs went numb. The first day, he found a stream and drank until his stomach cramped. The second day, he ate berries from a bush red, small, bitter. They stayed down. That was enough. By the third day, his body had stopped asking for food. It just moved, one foot after the other, because stopping meant thinking. The forest thickened around him. The road narrowed to a dirt path, then to nothing but undergrowth and fallen branches. His knees buckled twice. He caught himself on tree trunks, bark scraping his palms raw. He almost missed it. The cabin sat tucked between 2 old oaks, half swallowed by vines and dead leaves. Rust streaked down its metal roof in long brown tears. One window was shattered. The other hung crooked on its frame. The whole thing leaned slightly to the left, like it was tired of standing. He stopped walking. His legs trembled. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. The wind pushed through the trees, rattling the loose roof panels. No lights, no smoke, no sound of anyone inside. His hand found the door handle cold, rough with corrosion. It turned without resistance. The door swung open with a low groan, and the smell hit him first. Damp wood, mildew, something faintly animal. Dust floated in the thin light that leaked through the holes in the roof. Inside, a single room, a stone fireplace in the corner, blackened with old soot, a wooden floor warped by years of moisture, a broken chair, a table with one leg shorter than the others. He crossed the threshold. His legs gave out. He hit the floor hard, knees first, then palms. Stayed there, breathing. The wood was cold against his skin. Grit pressed into his cheek when he turned his head. The cabin didn't care who he was. It didn't care that he had nothing. It just stood there, broken and quiet, asking nothing of him. He crawled to the wall, pulled his knees to his chest, closed his eyes. For the first time in 18 years, no one was going to walk in and tell him this wasn't his place. Outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere in the distance, so faint he almost imagined it, something rustled through the dead leaves. Moving closer, he woke to cold so deep it had settled into his bones. Gray light filtered through the holes in the roof. His back ached from the hard floor. His fingers were stiff, curled against his chest for warmth. He uncurled them slowly, wincing at the pins and needles that shot through his palms. The cabin looked worse in daylight. Water stains ran down the walls in dark streaks. Cobwebs hung thick in the corners. The fireplace was clogged with debris, old leaves, dirt, what looked like part of a bird's nest. He sat up, his stomach cramped. He pressed a hand against it, waiting for the spasm to pass. First things first. He stood, legs unsteady, and walked the room, counting. The holes in the roof, 7. He could see sky through 3 of them. The windows, 2, both broken, one missing its glass entirely, the other cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The fireplace blocked, the floor warped in places, creaking under his weight. One spot near the center made a different sound hollow, like there was empty space beneath. He filed that away. Not important now. The roof was important. Winter was coming. He could feel it in the air, in the way the wind cut sharper each morning. He searched the cabin more carefully. In the corner, beneath a collapsed shelf. He found a pile of debris, rotted cloth, rusted tools, mouse droppings, and underneath it all, a wooden crate. Inside, a hammer with a cracked handle, a tin of nails, orange with age, a coil of wire, and a book. The cover was water-stained, the pages swollen and warped, but the title was still readable. The Homesteader's Guide to Self-Sufficiency. He opened it carefully. The spine cracked. Some pages were stuck together. Others had mold growing in the margins. But enough was legible diagrams of roof repairs, instructions for starting fires, illustrations of edible plants versus poisonous ones. Someone had lived here before, someone who'd planned to stay. He studied the roof repair section until the light through the holes shifted from gray to pale gold. Outside, he found a pile of old wooden planks behind the cabin, half rotted but some still solid. He dragged 3 of them inside. The hammer's handle held when he tested it. The nails were rusted but straight enough. He climbed onto the table. It wobbled under him. He steadied himself, reached up toward the nearest hole. The plank was heavier than expected. His arms shook. He pressed it against the roof, held a nail between his fingers, raised the hammer. The table tilted. His foot slipped. He grabbed for the wall, missed, and hit the floor hard. The plank clattered beside him. Dust billowed up around his face. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, at the hole he hadn't fixed. Get up. He got up, dragged the table back into position, climbed again. This time, he braced his feet wider, moved slower, raised the plank, raised the hammer, drove the nail in the wood split. The plank fell. He lost his balance and went down again, landing on his side this time. Pain flared through his ribs. Sharp. Wrong. He didn't get up. He lay on the dusty floor, breathing hard, ribs throbbing with each inhale. Above him, the sky stared back through 7 holes. Birds crossed his field of vision. Clouds moved slow and indifferent. 18 years in that place, and no one had taught him anything useful. Not how to fix a roof, not how to build a fire, not how to survive. They'd taught him how to make his bed, how to line up for meals, how to stay quiet and invisible. None of that helped here. A sound escaped his throat. Rough, strange. It took him a moment to recognize it. He was laughing. The sound echoed in the empty cabin, hollow and cracked, like his voice after days of silence. He laughed at the broken plank, at the useless hammer, at himself, lying on a dirty floor in an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere, with a book written for people who knew things, and ribs that screamed every time he breathed. If anyone saw him now, they'd think he'd lost his mind. But no one was watching. No one cared whether he was sane or crazy or dead. And that, somehow, felt like freedom. He stopped laughing, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He didn't get up. Not yet. The ribs wouldn't let him. He spent the rest of that day on the floor, propped against the wall, reading the water-damaged book, fire starting flint and steel, or certain rocks struck together. He'd need to find the right kind. Shelter repair support the plank from below before nailing. He'd done it backwards. Edible plants, illustrations of berries, roots, mushrooms, some safe, some deadly. The light faded. The cold crept back in. He slept against the wall. The book clutched to his chest like something precious. The next 2 days, he didn't try the roof again. His ribs hurt too much to lift his arms above his head. Instead, he worked on the fireplace, cleared the bird's nest, handful by handful, scraped soot from the flue with a flat stone, tested the draft by holding a dried leaf at the opening it fluttered upward. Good. He gathered materials the way the book described. Dry leaves, thin bark, shredded fine, small twigs, larger sticks. He found 2 rocks that looked like the illustration, one dark, one with veins of lighter mineral. Struck them together over the tinder. Nothing. Again. His knuckles scraped raw. Sparks. Finally, tiny orange stars that landed on the bark and died. Again. A spark caught, glowed red, spread, smoke rose, then flame. He sat back, hands trembling, and watched it grow. The warmth reached his face first, then his chest, his fingers. He held them toward the fire, watching the orange light flicker across his skin. By the end of the first week, he'd managed 1 hole in the roof. His ribs had faded from sharp pain to dull ache. The fire started easier now he'd learned which rocks worked best. How fine to shred the bark. He'd found the stream again, marked the path with broken branches so he wouldn't lose it. Caught nothing yet. The fish were too fast. His hands too clumsy. But he'd identified 3 plants from the book that were safe to eat. They tasted like dirt and disappointment. They kept him alive. On the 8th morning, he woke to silence. Wrong silence. The kind that meant something was out there, holding its breath. He heard it a second later. Footsteps. Outside. Slow. Hesitant. Like something deciding whether to come closer. He grabbed the broken branch he'd been using as a fire poker and faced the door. It creaked. A dog. It stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the underbrush. Gray fur matted with dirt, ribs showing through its coat like fingers pressing from inside. One ear torn, the edge ragged and healed wrong. It didn't move, just watched him with dark eyes. He lowered the branch. His heart still pounded, but the fear drained out of him, leaving something else behind, something he couldn't name. "Go on," he said. His voice came out rough, strange after days of silence. "Get out of here." The dog didn't move. He took a step toward it, raised the branch. "Go." It flinched, turned, disappeared into the trees. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening. Nothing but wind, birds, the creak of the cabin settling. Gone. He went back inside, fed the fire, tried not to think about the way the dog had looked at him wary, exhausted, expecting nothing good. The next morning, it was back. He spotted it from the window while checking the weather. Same spot at the edge of the clearing, same position sitting on its haunches, watching the cabin, not approaching, not begging, just there. He ignored it, went about his work. The second hole in the roof needed patching, and his ribs had healed enough to try again. He climbed carefully this time, bracing the plank from below like the book said. The first nail went in clean. Then the second. When he came down, the dog hadn't moved. "I can't feed you," he said, not looking at it. "I can barely feed myself." The dog's ears twitched. It didn't come closer. That night, he ate the last of the edible roots he'd gathered. His stomach growled an hour later. He lay by the fire, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside, and beneath the wind, another sound, faint, a whimper. He didn't get up. The third day, he caught a fish, small, barely the length of his hand, but real. The book had shown him how to make a simple trap from branches and wire, a narrow funnel that fish could swim into, but not out of. He'd spent 2 days building it wrong before getting it right. He cleaned the fish with a sharp rock, cooked it over the fire, ate every bit including the skin. It wasn't enough. It was something. The dog was still there, lying down now, under the old oak tree, about 20 meters from the cabin. It had dug a shallow depression in the leaves, curled into it, not sleeping, watching. He looked at the fish bones in his hand, looked at the dog. He walked outside, crossed half the distance, and threw the bones toward the oak. They landed a few feet from the dog's nose. He turned and went back inside without looking. Through the cracked window, he saw the dog uncurl, approach the bones slowly, head low, tail tucked. Sniff, look toward the cabin, sniff again, eat. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he wouldn't do it again. The next fish he caught, he kept half the meat for himself and threw the other half outside. Days passed. The dog stayed. It never came closer than 10 meters, never barked, never wagged its tail, just existed at the edge of his vision, a gray shape against the brown and gold of the autumn forest. He stopped chasing it away. 2 weeks after he'd arrived at the cabin, clouds rolled in fast and heavy. The temperature dropped. Wind tore through the trees, rattling the walls. He'd patched 3 of the 7 holes by now, but the remaining 4 leaked steady streams of water onto the floor. He positioned the bucket, the one piece of intact metalware he'd found under the worst leak, set a cracked pot under another. The rain hammered the roof like fists. Lightning flashed. Thunder rolled across the forest. The fire flickered, threatened to die. He fed it more wood, wrapped himself in the old blanket he'd salvaged from the debris pile, moth-eaten, thin, but better than nothing. The storm raged. Sometime past midnight, during a brief lull, he heard scratching at the door. He opened it. The dog stood on the narrow porch, soaked through, shivering so hard its legs shook. Water dripped from its matted fur. Its torn ear was plastered flat against its skull. It didn't try to come in, just stood there, looking at him. He stepped back. The dog hesitated, looked at him, looked at the fire inside. He didn't say anything, didn't gesture, just left the door open and walked back to his spot by the fire. A moment later, he heard the click of claws on wood. The dog entered, moving slow, staying close to the wall. It circled once, twice, then settled in the far corner, as far from him as it could get while still being inside. They didn't look at each other. The fire crackled. The rain pounded the roof. Water dripped into the bucket with a steady ping, ping, ping. The dog curled into a tight ball, nose tucked under its tail, still shivering, but less now that it was out of the wind. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders, watched the flames. 2 things thrown away, ending up in the same broken place. The storm blew itself out before dawn. He woke to pale light and silence and a sound he'd never heard before. Snoring. He sat up fast, heart hammering, hand reaching for the branch. The dog, still in the corner, still curled up, fast asleep, and snoring like an old man after too much whiskey. The sound was absurd, loud, rattling, completely at odds with the scrawny, beaten-down creature making it. He stared. The dog's legs twitched, dreaming of something, running, maybe. Its lips pulled back slightly, showing worn teeth. A sound built in his chest, pressure behind his ribs. It rose up through his throat before he could stop it. He laughed, quiet at first, then louder, shoulders shaking, eyes stinging. He laughed at the snoring dog, at the absurdity of it all, at himself alone in a falling down cabin in the middle of nowhere. And the closest thing he had to company was a stray that sounded like a broken engine. The laughing shifted, cracked. His eyes burned, wet. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, kept wiping, couldn't stop. The dog opened one eye, looked at him, closed it again. Its snoring resumed. He sat there on the cold floor, blanket pooled around his waist, watching this dog that didn't trust him, that he couldn't afford to feed, that was probably as damaged as he was. "Fine," he whispered. His voice broke on the word, "fine." He didn't know what he was agreeing to, didn't know what this was or what it would become. Maybe nothing. Maybe the dog would leave tomorrow and never come back. But right now, in this moment, He wasn't completely alone, and that was the closest thing to family he'd ever known. The dog's snoring hitched, stopped. Its ear, the good one, swiveled toward the door. He heard it a second later. Footsteps. Human footsteps. Coming up the path toward the cabin. The dog lifted its head. A low growl rumbled in its chest. Someone was coming. He grabbed the branch and pressed himself against the wall beside the door. The dog stayed low. Hackles raised. That growl still vibrating in its chest. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched. Then a deer. It stepped into the clearing. Head high. Ears swiveling. It saw the cabin, froze, and bolted back into the trees. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hand shook around the branch. Just a deer. The dog relaxed, circled twice, lay back down. Its eyes stayed on the door for a while longer, then drifted closed. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. His heart still pounded. A deer, that was all. But the fear stayed with him the rest of the morning. The reminder that the world outside still existed, that anyone could walk up that path at any time. He threw himself into work to forget it. The floor needed fixing. Several boards had warped so badly they'd pulled away from the joists, creating gaps where cold air seeped through. He'd been avoiding them, focusing on the roof. But winter was coming fast. He could see his breath in the mornings now. Ice formed on the water bucket overnight. By the end of the second month, he'd patched 4 of the 7 holes in the roof. The book had taught him patience measure twice. Brace properly. Don't rush. His ribs no longer hurt. His hands had developed calluses where blisters used to form. He started on the floor in the corner farthest from the fire, pried up a rotted board, cut a replacement from the salvaged planks outside, hammered it into place, moved to the next. The dog watched him from its corner. It had claimed that spot, now wouldn't sleep anywhere else. Sometimes it followed him outside when he gathered wood or checked the fish trap, never close, always 5 or 6 feet behind. But there, he'd stopped throwing food toward it, started setting the portion down halfway between them instead. Each day, the dog came a little closer to retrieve it. By afternoon, he'd reached the center of the room, the spot he'd noticed that first day, the one that sounded different when he walked over it. Hollow. He knelt down, knocked on the boards with his knuckles, thunk, 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 then thunk, deeper, emptier, like there was space beneath. The dog's ears pricked forward. It stood up, walked over, sniffed the floor. A low growl rumbled in its throat, different from the warning growl, more uncertain. It backed away, staring at the spot. "What's your problem?" The dog growled again. At the floor. He almost smiled. Almost. He grabbed the hammer and started prying up boards. The first one came loose with a crack. Dust billowed up. He coughed, waved it away. The dog retreated to its corner, still growling. Beneath the board darkness, a gap. He pried up another board, then another. The hole widened. Not a gap. A door. Old wood, darker than the floor around it. Iron hinges, orange with rust, a ring handle, half buried in debris. He sat back on his heels, stared at it. The cabin had a cellar. His pulse quickened. He reached for the ring, brushed away the dirt. The metal was cold, rough. He pulled. Nothing. Stuck. He braced his feet, pulled harder. The hinges screamed. Rust flaked off in orange showers. The door lifted an inch, 2, then swung open with a groan that echoed into the darkness below. Cold air rushed up, different from the cabin's cold odor, damper, carrying the smell of earth and something else. Paper, old paper. He leaned over the opening. Couldn't see much. Just wooden steps leading down into shadow. The dog barked once, sharp, accusatory. "Stay there," he muttered. He grabbed a burning stick from the fire, held it over the hole. The light pushed back the darkness enough to show him stone walls, a dirt floor, shapes. He climbed down. The cellar was small, maybe 8 feet square. Low ceiling, just tall enough for him to stand without ducking. Rough stone walls lined with wooden shelves, and on those shelves, papers, stacks of them, rolled tubes that might be maps or drawings, a tin box, rusted shut, glass jars filled with something he couldn't identify, and a notebook. He reached for it. The leather cover was cracked and stiff, but it held together when he picked it up. He carried it back up the steps, into the light. The dog had stopped growling. It sat at the edge of the hole, peering down, tail tucked. "Just old stuff," he said, talking to the dog. When had he started doing that? He settled by the fire, opened the notebook. The handwriting was neat at first, then looser toward the end. Dates at the top of each entry, going back decades. Notes about the cabin repairs needed, materials used. Notes about the forest, where to find good timber, which mushrooms were safe, how deep to dig for water. Water. He flipped faster, found a section with drawings, a diagram of the land around the cabin, lines and measurements, arrows pointing to a spot marked spring source. Underground water, a natural spring, feeding into the stream he'd been drinking from. But here, closer, right here, according to these notes, he kept reading. The handwriting got harder to follow. Some pages were water-stained, the ink blurred, but the last entry was clear. No date on this one, just words. Written in a shaky hand, "This place kept me alive when nothing else would. The water is good. The land is good. I tried to build something here. Didn't finish. Hope one day someone will." The sentence stopped there. No period. No continuation on the next page. Just blank paper and the smell of old ink. He sat with the notebook open on his lap for a long time. The fire crackled. The dog eventually padded over closer than it had ever come and lay down 3 feet away. Still not touching, but close. Outside, snow had started falling. First flakes of the season. They drifted past the window like ash. Someone had lived here before him. Someone had found this place, fixed it up, discovered the water, drawn maps and made plans. Someone had started a sentence they never got to finish. And now he was here, holding that unfinished sentence in his hands. He looked around the cabin, at the patched roof, 4 holes fixed, 3 to go, at the cleared fireplace, the stacked wood, the repaired floorboards, at the dog, watching him with those dark, wary eyes. He closed the notebook, set it carefully on the table. Tomorrow, he would go back down into the cellar, look at the maps properly, figure out where the spring source was and whether he could access it. But tonight he sat by the fire with a dog that didn't quite trust him and a notebook full of someone else's hopes. And for the first time, he felt like he was part of something bigger than just surviving. The snow fell harder. The dog's ears twitched, then swiveled toward the door. Not a deer this time. He knew the difference now. Engine sounds. Distant, but getting closer. A vehicle coming up the old road, the one he thought was abandoned. Someone was coming. Someone with a car. The engine cut off somewhere beyond the tree line. A door slammed. Footsteps crunched through fallen leaves. He moved to the window. The dog pressed against his leg, the closest it had ever come. Its growl was low, continuous. A man emerged from the trees, middle-aged, clean jacket, unmarked boots. He walked like someone who knew where he was going, scanning the cabin as he approached, taking in the patched roof, the smoke rising from the chimney. He stopped at the edge of the clearing. "Hello there." The man raised a hand, friendly, too friendly. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here." The dog's growl deepened. He opened the door, stood in the frame, didn't step outside. "Can I help you?" "Just passing through. Heard there might be an old structure up this way, wanted to see if it was still standing." The man smiled. His teeth were very white. "You living here?" "Yes. All by yourself." The dog pushed past his legs, positioning itself between him and the stranger. Hackles up, teeth showing. The man took a step back. "Whoa, friendly dog you got there. She doesn't like strangers." The word came out without thinking. "I can see that." The man's eyes moved past him, scanning the interior of the cabin. The fire, the repaired floor, the notebook on the table. "Nice setup. Fix the place up yourself." Must have been a lot of work. "This land's been abandoned for years." The man paused. "You own it. Got papers?" His stomach tightened. "I live here." Sure. Just curious." The man held up both hands, placating, innocent. "Well, I should get going. Just wanted to see if anyone was around." He turned and walked back toward the trees. Unhurried, relaxed. The dog didn't stop growling until the engine started up again and faded into the distance. He closed the door, leaned against it. His hands were shaking. Something wasn't right. A week passed. He told himself the man wouldn't come back. Told himself it was nothing, just a stranger passing through, like he'd said. Then the black SUV appeared. 2 men this time, different from the first, better dressed. The one in front wore a dark coat that looked like it cost more than everything he'd ever owned combined. His shoes were polished despite the snow. They pulled up at the edge of the clearing, didn't bother hiding their approach. He met them outside. The dog stayed on the porch, growling. "Good morning." The man in the coat smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You must be the young man Carl mentioned." Carl. So the first one had reported back. He said nothing. "My name's Reynolds. This is my associate, Mr. Porter." The second man nodded, but didn't speak. "We represent some people who are interested in this property. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale. Reynolds reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper. We're prepared to offer you $5,000. Cash, today. You sign this. The money's yours. $5,000. More money than he'd ever seen. More than he could imagine. Enough to rent a room somewhere. Buy food for months. Start over in a real town with real people. Enough to be safe. No. The word came out before he thought about it. Reflex. Instinct. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. No. I said no. You haven't even looked at the offer. Don't need to. The two men exchanged a glance. Something passed between them, silent, unreadable. Reynolds folded the paper and tucked it back into his coat, still smiling. That's your right, of course, but I'd encourage you to think about it. A young man like you, out here alone, his eyes moved to the cabin. Things can happen, accidents, fires, harsh winters. The dog's growl turned into a bark, sharp, warning. Think about it, Reynolds said again. We'll be in touch. They walked back to the SUV. Porter glanced over his shoulder, once not at him, but at the cabin, assessing, calculating. The doors closed. The engine started. They drove away. He stood in the snow until he couldn't hear them anymore. His heart hammered against his ribs. His jaw ached from clenching. $5,000. And a threat wrapped in silk. That night, he couldn't sleep. The fire had burned low. The cabin creaked in the wind. Snow piled against the windows, glowing faint blue in the darkness. The dog lay near his feet, closer than ever before. It had followed him around all evening, pressing against his legs, sleeping with one eye open. He stared at the ceiling, at the patches he'd made, at the work of his own hands. 2 months ago, he'd walked out of a place where no one knew his name. He'd had nothing, been nothing, just a number, room 7. Now he had walls, a roof mostly fixed, a fire that he could start on his own, a cellar full of someone else's hopes, a notebook with an unfinished sentence, and a dog that wouldn't leave. He sat up. The dog lifted its head, watching him. You need a name, he said quietly. The dog's ears twitched. He thought about it, tried different words in his mind. Nothing fit, nothing felt right. Then he remembered the first thing he'd wanted to say to it, back when it was just a shape at the edge of the clearing, ready to bolt at any sudden movement, when it came back day after day, and all he wanted was for it to keep coming back. Stay. Stay, he said out loud. The dog's tail moved, just once, a small thump against the floor. That's your name now. Stay, the dog. Stay lowered its head back to its paws, but its eyes remained open, watching him. And for the first time, something in those dark eyes looked less wary, more like recognition. He lay back down, pulled the blanket up to his chin. Stay. That was what he wanted. For both of them. To stay here. In this broken place they were slowly making whole. To not run. To not be pushed out. For the first time in his life, he had something to lose. Stay pressed warm against his feet. Outside. The snow kept falling, and somewhere out there, men in expensive coats were making plans. He didn't know what they wanted, didn't know why this cabin, this worthless, broken down cabin mattered to them. But he knew one thing: they would come back, and next time, the offer might not be so polite. They came back 10 days later, same black SUV, same polished shoes, but this time there were 3 of them. Reynolds led the way. Porter followed. The third man stayed by the car, arms crossed, watching, stay pressed against his legs, growling low and steady. 10,000. Reynolds didn't bother with greetings this time. Just the number, flat and final. No, you're not thinking clearly. Reynolds stepped closer. His cologne cut through the cold air, sharp, expensive, out of place. Look at yourself. Look at this place. You're living in a ruin. You've got nothing, no money, no family, no future. Take the offer. His face burned. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in his throat. What do you think you can do here? Reynolds spread his arms, gesturing at the cabin. Fix a few boards, patch a roof. Then what? Winter's barely started. You'll freeze, starve, and for what pride? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Reynolds smiled. That's what I thought. I said no. You don't even know what you're protecting. Reynolds pulled out a folded map newer than the one in the cellar, printed on glossy paper. This land sits on one of the largest freshwater aquifers in the region. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what it's worth? He didn't. Not really. But he saw the way Reynolds' eyes gleamed when he said it. The water rights alone are worth more than you'll make in your entire life. Companies pay millions for access to sources like this. Millions. Reynolds leaned in. And you're squatting in a shack you don't even own, pretending you have a claim. Stay barked. Sharp. Aggressive. Reynolds stepped back. His smile didn't waver. 15,000. Final offer. Take it, or what? The words came out harder than he expected. Rougher. Reynolds tilted his head, studied him like something mildly interesting. Or nothing. We'll just wait. People like you. He gestured at the patched jacket, the worn boots, the dirt under his fingernails. You don't last. The land does. We can wait. They left. He stood in the clearing, shaking. Not from cold. People like you. The words echoed. He looked down at himself, at the clothes he'd been wearing for weeks, at his hands cracked, calloused, nails rimmed with grime, at the cabin behind him, better than it was, but still crooked, still leaking, still held together with salvage and stubbornness. What was he doing here? What made him think he could keep this? Stay whined. Pressed her nose against his palm. He pulled away, walked toward the stream. Needed to move, needed to not think. The path was icy. He didn't notice until his foot slipped. He went down hard, landed on his side, slid, crashed through a thin crust of ice into the mud at the stream's edge. Cold water soaked through his clothes. Mud splattered his face, filled his mouth gritty, foul, tasting of rot and dead leaves. He scrambled up, slipped again, went down on his hands and knees, fingers sinking into the black muck up to his wrists. For a moment, he just knelt there, covered in filth. Freezing, water dripping from his chin. This was who he was. This was what he amounted to. A boy from nowhere, kneeling in the mud, pretending he could hold on to something. He spat. Brown water ran down his chin. His reflection stared up at him from the shallow pool, pathetic, mud-streaked, shaking. People like you don't last. He couldn't argue with that. Not like this. Not covered in muck. On his knees in the dirt like an animal. The sound of footsteps made him look up. An old man stood on the bank. White hair, deep wrinkles, clothes worn but clean, a flannel shirt under a patched coat. He leaned on a walking stick, watching. "Nasty spot, that," the old man said. "Ice breaks there every year. My grandfather used to warn us about it. He should say something, should get up on his own. Instead, he just knelt there, dripping mud, unable to move." The old man studied him for a long moment, then extended a hand. The grip was stronger than he expected. He pulled himself out of the muck, stood dripping on the frozen bank. Mud caked his clothes, his face, his hair. He couldn't meet the old man's eyes. "You fixed up the cabin," the old man said. He nodded, still couldn't speak, still tasting mud. More than fixed. The old man started walking toward the cabin. Slow, steady. "I've been watching the smoke for weeks. First time in 40 years there's been smoke from that chimney." He followed without thinking, leaving muddy footprints in the snow. Stay met them at the edge of the clearing. She sniffed the old man once, then sat down. No growling, no warning. "She knows I'm not trouble," the old man said. He stopped at the porch, looked at the cabin for a long moment. "My grandfather built this place. Harmon was his name. Died before I was born. But my father told stories." He stared. "Your grandfather. The spring you found it. The notes. I found a cellar. Maps. A notebook." The old man nodded slowly. "The water fed half the valley back then. Families came from miles around. Harmon wanted to build something proper. A well. Maybe a reservoir. Never finished. His fingers traced the grain of the wood. Life got in the way. Then he was gone." Silence. "The men in suits," the old man said. "They came to see you. Yes, they'll keep coming. That water's worth more now than it ever was. They'll offer more money, make threats, try to wear you down." The old man's gaze was steady. "This land's been in legal limbo for decades. No clear title. That's why they can only ask, they can't just take it, not without a fight that'd cost them more than it's worth." His stomach clenched. "I don't have any claim either." "No," the old man agreed. "But you're here. You're fixing what's broken. And sometimes that counts for more than paper." He looked down at himself, at the mud drying on his clothes, at his hands, still shaking. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. The words tasted like the muck still on his lips. "I don't know why I'm here. He stopped. Couldn't finish. The old man waited. No one ever His voice cracked. No one ever said I could do anything. No one ever thought I was worth. He stopped again, wiped his face. Mud smeared across his cheek. The old man looked at him for a long moment. Really looked. Not at the mud, not at the patched clothes, at him. This place fed a lot of people once. Good people who had nothing, just like you. He paused. There aren't many of us left who remember. Maybe none. Soon. He turned to leave. Stopped. Turned back. You might be the only one who can keep it now. The words landed somewhere deep in his chest, settled there like a stone dropped into still water. He watched the old man disappear into the trees, stay pressed against his legs. He reached down, mud still caking his fingers, and rested his hand on her head. You might be the only one. No one had ever said anything like that to him. Not once in 18 years. He walked back inside, stripped off the muddy clothes, washed his face in the bucket of melted snow. The water turned brown. He refilled it, washed again. Then he sat by the fire, stay at his feet, and opened the notebook. The unfinished sentence stared up at him. Hope one day someone will. He stared at those words until the fire burned low and the shadows crept across the floor. Tomorrow, Reynolds would probably come back with more money, more threats, more reasons why people like him didn't last. But tonight, for the first time, he had an answer forming in the dark. And the question that kept him awake, was he willing to lose everything to keep it? They came at dawn. The SUV pulled up while frost still covered the ground. 3 men again, Reynolds in front. Porter behind. The third one, the one who never spoke, stayed by the car. Stay was already growling before they reached the porch. Reynolds didn't smile this time. His face was flat, professional, done with games. $20,000. The number hung in the cold air. 20,000. He could rent an apartment for years with that. Buy real clothes, eat real food, be warm every night without chopping wood and feeding a fire that never lasted until morning. He could be safe. That's the final number, Reynolds said. No negotiation, no counteroffers. 20,000. And you walk away today. His mouth was dry. His hands felt numb, and not from the cold. What if I say no? Reynolds tilted his head. You won't. But if I do, then we wait. Reynolds shrugged. You struggle through winter. Maybe you make it. Maybe you don't. Either way, this land will still be here, and we'll still want it. We've got lawyers looking into every angle. The title dispute won't last forever. Porter stepped forward. Let's be honest here. His voice was softer than Reynolds, almost kind. Look at yourself. Really look. You're a kid with nothing. No family, no education, no future. You stumbled onto something valuable by accident. That's all this is, an accident. The words cut deeper than Reynolds' threats ever had. You don't belong here, Porter continued. You don't have any connection to this place. You're not protecting anything. You're just squatting, holding on to something because you don't know what else to do. Stay's growl intensified. He put a hand on her head. She quieted, but her body stayed tense. Take the money, Porter said. Start over somewhere else. Build an actual life. Build an actual life. as if this wasn't actual, as if the roof he'd patched, and the fire he'd learned to make, and the floor he'd repaired weren't real. "We'll give you until tomorrow morning," Reynolds said. 20,000. Final answer. Think about what you're choosing." They walked back to the SUV. Doors closed. Engine started. He watched them drive away until the sound faded to nothing. That night, he couldn't sleep. The fire burned low. Stay lay pressed against his side. She'd stopped keeping distance weeks ago. Her warmth seeped through the thin blanket. He stared at the ceiling, at the patches he'd made, at the walls he'd cleaned, at the stack of firewood in the corner, each piece gathered by his own hands. $20,000. He sat up. Stay lifted her head, watching him. He looked around the cabin, really looked. The floor he'd repaired, board by board, learning from failures. The fireplace he'd cleared, the chimney he'd unclogged, the windows he'd covered with salvaged plastic to keep out the wind, the shelf he'd built from scrap wood, holding the notebook and the water-damaged book that had taught him how to survive. 3 months of work, 3 months of waking up cold and hungry and doing it anyway. He reached for the notebook, opened it to the last page. Hope one day someone will. The sentence without an ending. He thought about the old man, about Harmon, who'd built this cabin, about families coming from miles around to drink from the spring, about a community that didn't exist anymore, about Reynolds saying you don't belong here. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was all an accident. A desperate kid with nowhere to go, stumbling onto land worth more than he could imagine. But then why did it feel like this? Why did waking up here feel different from waking up at the orphanage? Why did patching a roof make his chest tight in a way that getting food from a cafeteria line never had? He closed the notebook. Stay pressed, her nose against his hand. Her tail thumped once against the floor. He thought about taking the money. Really thought about it. $20,000. A fresh start. Safety. And then what another room he didn't choose. Another place where someone could tell him to leave. Another life where he owned nothing. Built nothing. Meant nothing. He'd spent 18 years like that. Invisible. Interchangeable. Room 7. His hand found Stay's head. She leaned into his touch. He stayed awake most of the night, watching the fire burn down, watching the shadows move across the walls. Somewhere around midnight, Stay got up, walked to the door, looked back at him. He followed her, opened it. Cold air rushed in. The sky was clear. Stars scattered across the darkness. Stay sat on the porch, looked out at the forest. He sat beside her. 2 things, discarded by the world, sitting in the cold, waiting for morning. When the sun came up, he knew. The SUV arrived at 9. Same 3 men, same polished shoes crunching through the snow. He met them at the edge of the clearing. Stay stood beside him, not growling this time, just present, solid. Reynolds stopped 5 feet away, pulled out the contract. Well, he looked at Reynolds, at Porter, at the man by the car. He looked at the cabin behind him, the crooked walls, the patched roof, the smoke rising from the chimney. He looked at Stay. Then he looked at Reynolds again. No. One word: quiet, steady. Reynolds' expression didn't change. No, no. You understand what you're giving up. Yes, you understand we won't stop. There are other ways. Legal pressure, time. Yes. Silence. Porter shook his head. You're making a mistake. Maybe. Probably. He didn't know what he was doing. Didn't know if he could survive the rest of winter. Didn't know if this cabin would still be standing in spring. But for the first time in his life, he was the one deciding. Not them, not the orphanage, not anyone else. Him. Reynolds stared at him for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not frustration, confusion. Then he turned and walked back to the SUV. The doors closed. The engine started. They drove away. He stood in the clearing. Stay pressed warm against his leg. They'd be back. Different tactics, legal battles, whatever it took. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, he'd chosen. He turned and walked back inside, left the door open behind him, just in case. 3 years passed. The roof didn't leak anymore. All 7 holes patched, sealed, weatherproofed with materials he'd traded for in the valley, firewood, mostly, and fish from the stream. The windows had glass now, salvaged from an abandoned farmhouse 2 miles east. The door hung straight on new hinges. The cabin still leaned slightly to the left. He'd decided to leave that. It felt right. The first year had been the hardest. Reynolds and his people tried other angles, lawyers sending letters, county officials asking questions. But the old man had been right. The title was too tangled, the history too murky. Fighting it would cost them more than the land was worth, at least for now. They stopped coming. Maybe they were waiting. Maybe they'd moved on to easier targets. He didn't care anymore. He was still here. The well took 6 months to dig. Backbreaking work, 1 shovel at a time, following Harmon's notes until he hit water. Cold and clean, just like the notebook promised. The old man's grandson helped him line it with stones from the riverbed, taught him how to build a proper well cover. The old man himself had passed that winter, peaceful, in his sleep. His grandson said. The funeral was small. He'd stood in the back, not knowing anyone, not sure he belonged there, but he'd gone. That seemed important. He stood on the porch now, coffee warming his hands, real coffee, bought from the general store in town, a small luxury. The clearing had changed. 2 small structures sat at the edge of the trees, not cabins, really, more like sturdy shelters. Ellen had arrived at the second spring, saw the smoke from the valley the way he once had. Thomas came 6 months later. Neither asked permission to stay. They'd just appeared at the edge of the clearing, uncertain, waiting to be chased off. He hadn't chased them off. Ellen emerged from her shelter now, waved once, headed toward the well with a bucket. Thomas was already at the woodpile, splitting logs with steady, methodical swings. Neither needed instruction. They knew the rhythm. He looked at the old maple tree behind the cabin, at the small stone beneath it, half covered with fallen leaves. Stay wasn't on the porch beside him. She'd gone quietly. One morning she didn't get up. He'd known before he touched her something in the stillness, the way the cabin felt emptier even before he opened his eyes. He'd carried her to the tree, dug the hole himself, sat there until the sun went down. 8 months ago. Some mornings he still woke up reaching for her, still listened for her snoring in the quiet hours before dawn. The grief had softened into something else, not absence, presence in a different form, the way she'd taught him to trust, the way she'd stayed when staying was hard. He finished his coffee, set the mug on the porch railing. He thought about the notebook sometimes, the unfinished sentence. Hope one day someone will. He'd never written the ending. Maybe sentences like that weren't meant to be finished, just continued, passed along. Movement at the edge of the clearing caught his eye. A figure stood near the tree line. Young, couldn't be more than 17. Thin jacket, worn shoes, a bag over one shoulder, the kind that held everything a person owned. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching the cabin, watching the smoke, watching the people move through the clearing like they belonged. He recognized that posture, that hesitation, the way someone stood when they were deciding whether to run or stay. He'd stood like that once, at the edge of this same clearing, looking at a ruin that no one wanted. The figure shifted, took half a step back. He didn't wave, didn't call out, didn't walk toward them. He just turned and went inside, left the door open behind him. The cabin was warm, fire crackling. The notebook sat on the shelf where he kept it, now not hidden, just put away. He moved to the corner where he kept a wooden box. Inside, a blanket, a spare coat, dried food, things he'd started keeping after Ellen arrived, after Thomas, after he realized that people sometimes found their way here the same way he had lost, alone, looking for something they couldn't name. He carried the box to the table, set it down, sat in the chair by the fire, outside. Footsteps on the porch, hesitant, stopping. He didn't look up. A shadow fell across the doorway. The figure stood at the threshold, not entering, not leaving. I saw the smoke. The voice was young, tired, cracking. From the valley. I didn't know anyone lived up here. Some people do. Silence. The voice faltered. I don't have anywhere to go. He finally looked up, met the eyes of a kid who looked exactly like he had 3 years ago. Dirty, exhausted, expecting to be told to leave. There's food in the box, he said. Blanket too. Fire's warm. The kid stared at him. Didn't move. You're not going to ask where I came from? No. Or why I'm here? No. The kid's hands shook. Why? He thought about the question, about all the answers he could give. Because someone left a door open for him, once a cabin that didn't ask questions, didn't demand papers, didn't care who he'd been. Because Stay stayed when she didn't have to. Because an old man climbed a hill just to say he might be the only one. But he didn't say any of that. Because the door was open, he said simply. And you walked through it. The kid stood there for a long moment, then crossed the threshold, sat down by the fire, pulled the blanket from the box and wrapped it around thin shoulders. They didn't speak again. Outside, Ellen returned from the well. Thomas stacked the last of the split wood. Snow began to fall light, quiet, covering the clearing in white. He looked at the kid by the fire, at the cabin that didn't leak anymore, at the stone under the maple tree. 3 years ago, someone had handed him a bag and closed a door. Now he left doors open. That was enough. Sometimes enough was everything. Some stories leave us quiet. This one may have settled somewhere tender, a place that knows what it feels like to be handed a bag and shown a door. A place that remembers being overlooked, being told we don't belong. Many of us have stood at closed doors. Some of us have carried things alone for so long we forgot we were carrying anything at all. Perhaps you know what it's like to build something with your hands when no one believed you could. Perhaps you know the weight of staying when leaving would have been easier. Perhaps you've loved something that couldn't love you back the same way and loved it anyway. These feelings don't need to be explained. They don't need to be fixed or understood completely. They're allowed to sit with us, unresolved. The way some things in life simply are. Not every ache needs an answer. Not every quiet moment needs filling. It's all right if this story stirred something old. It's okay if it reminded you of someone or of yourself. Years ago, standing at the edge of a clearing, wondering if you should stay or go. You don't have to do anything with that. You can just let it rest. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.